Number one, explain what latifondo is and how does it work. Latifondo is like a system where these large estates like farms or plantations are owned by a small group of wealthy landowners. Now this is caused by like one rich landowner who controls a large amount of land and has workers, or otherwise known as peasants, working this land, and in this land they're growing like sugar or rubber, not for the local people, but to be exported. And this, even after slavery ends, this system stays in place and keeps workers dependent and exploited. And now with the quote, the more product is desired by the world market, the greater the misery it brings to Latin American people whose sacrifice creates it. And how it connects to latifondo. Well, when a global demand for product like sugar or rubber increases, landowners want to produce more of it. Because this all basically comes to money. Money is like the big goal here. And so in order for them to maximize this type of product, they will continuously like have low wages for these workers. They'll put them in harsh conditions, and they will expand plantations sometimes. And so this profits landowners and foreign markets. And so as the world is getting cheap sugar and rubber, it's causing Latin American workers poverty and violence and this continuous bad image towards Latin America. Number two, please reflect on the following and explain what conditions Galeano mentioned about Recife, Brazil. And so Galeano talks about humid littoral, or the forest zone. And in this section, he's like being ironic because at one point the land was naturally fertile and it was a full forest of trees and everything, also known as Recife. And centuries later, it was all cleared for sugar plantations. And Galeano is showing that how the region that produces wealth and food for the world is also the place where people are suffering the most, and hunger stays a constant. People are constantly suffering from chronic hunger, and the land is controlled by the latifondo system, which means sugar plantations are dominating the land. And with the mass migration here, peasants are being sold for $18 each, and they're being arrested and they're being transported in steamers, and they're being sold to other landowners, basically all replicating slavery even after its abolishment. And so with the sugar industry, it does create great wealth. It just all goes to landowners and exporters. And Galeano is highlighting that the land is rich, that the economy is profitable, but the system is built solely for exporting, and it doesn't help or feed the local people. It just focuses on the money. Question 3, what do Adam Smith and Sergio Bagu say about the discovering Americas in slavery, and what does Galeano say about the triangular commerce? Well, Adam Smith says that the discovery of the Americas helped make the mercantile system more powerful and wealthier than ever before, that the Americas made Europe rich, and that the colonial trade brought splendors and glory to European commerce. And so here, Galeano is showing the hidden side. He is saying that the world actually came from slavery and exploitation, not just trade. And then Sergio argues that slavery in the Americas was the main force behind the accumulation of mercantile capital, which means that slavery wasn't accidental or outdated, and that it was essential to building modern capitalism. And that the profit from slavery, from slave labor, was the foundations for Europeans' revolution. For factories, for ships, for railroads, and all these banks. And so Galeano also explains that these millions of Africans being transported across the Atlantic was a part of this triangular trade, where the Europeans sent goods to Africa, Africa sent enslaved people to the Americas, and the Americas sent cotton and coffee and minerals to Europe. So it was just a triangular trade. Question 4. Please explain what the book says about William Walker, William Taft, and the Nobel Peace Prize winner Teddy Roosevelt and their relationship to Latin America. And so these three people are all completely different in their roles and are important to the whole history. And so William Walker was a private military adventurer who invaded Central America in the mid-1800s. And according to Galeano, he invaded Nicaragua, El Salvador, and Honduras. And he declared himself president, and he restored slavery in the territories he had occupied. So he acted with support from the U.S. financial interests and government approval. And when he returned to the U.S., he was treated as a hero. And so Galeano uses Walker as an example of early U.S. imperialism in Latin America. And William Taft openly supported the U.S. expansion. He said the entire Western Hemisphere would belong to the U.S. And he used race superiority as a justification. And so Galeano shows Taft supported intervention not for democracy, but for the economic control and the profit. And then Teddy Roosevelt. And so Teddy Roosevelt was criticized for his role in Panama. So Panama wanted its independence from Colombia, and he supported it. And then he took control of Panama's canal zone, and then he bragged about having the canal zone. And so Galeano argues that Panama was essentially created to serve the U.S.'s interests, not out of concern for the Latin America's independence. Question 5. Explain how Commander Smedley D. Butler helped the United States and several countries in Latin America. And with General Butler, he admitted that he helped the U.S. military force to protect American business interests in Latin America. He explains that the U.S. Marines intervened in Latin America countries to supposedly protect Americans' lives and interests, but in reality was for the economic interests. And so in his words, he held Mexico in protecting the American oil interests, and Haiti and Cuba secure revenue collection for the National City Bank. For Nicaragua, protect the banking house of the Brown Brothers. For DR, define American sugar interests. And for Honduras, support American fruit companies. And so Galeano uses Butler as an example, a confession as proof that the U.S. Power in Latin America served Wall Street and other big businesses rather than the people who were actually living in these countries. Question 6. Finally, explain the fortune of bad fortune, the 13 colonies that Galeano argues. And well, this is basically saying that the United States was lucky that they were not rich nor important at this time. At this time, the U.S. had no gold or silver or tropical plants or a large, massive indigenous empire or massive slave plantation systems. And so, since the colonies didn't produce highly valuable export goods, England didn't depend on them as much, and the economic relationship was weak. And so Latin America is known for being rich because they have these so many resources, and are independent, but leave their people in poverty and are constantly being exploited. Whereas the 13 colonies is known as poor, but has their independency, and clearly compared to other countries, that the 13 different areas, the 13 colonies does a lot better with their independency and working on that. Question 7. According to Steele, the growth of tourism and mining is detrimental to life and opportunities of low and moderate income people in Catamarca and and Cusco. Please explain in detail why and how these dynamics function in each city. Provide at least 2 examples for each city. And so with these two, it argues that there's a large scale of economic growth for mining and tourism, and that it does not benefit low and moderate income residents. Instead, these interests focus on wealth, increasing inequality, and reducing access to land and rentals and basic resources. And so Cajamarca is shaped by gold mines. That's what they're known for, and yet the locals face these consequences. With one, a lot of water is needed for the mining, and this leads to water getting polluted, and that means that farmers lose their crops and their animals because of this pollution. Number 2, unequal economic benefits. A lot of these positions that are opening up require a lot of skill that the people aren't here for, and so basically it is asking for help outside, like outsiders help, not from the people of these areas. And so with Cusco, it is mostly driven by tourism because of Machu Picchu, and so rising properties and displacement. Tourism, it means there is a need for restaurants and hotels and rentals, and so this means that rent increases, and that the places, like the villages and all that, like the housing that people had grown up with all their lives, and their mother's lives and their grandparents' lives, and they can't afford it all of a sudden, and they're just kicking people out because these residents aren't able to afford the increase in rent. And number 2, tourism jobs are low paying and unstable. And so with a lot of tourism, people expect to see street vendors or service workers, and within those jobs, it's very unstable because you never know what you're gonna go home to. It depends on your mood. It depends on how people are feeling, and making, like, it's not a set salary, so you never know what you're expecting. The last question is number 8. What was the argument of the market to privatize health services in Latin America, and what have been the outcomes since then, according to the article? Do you think the market should control elements like this? Why or why not? And so the main argument was that these health services in Latin America should be privatized because it was seen more as efficient, cost effective, and able to respond to consumers' demands. And so the idea was that the competition would improve quality and reduce government spending. But the outcomes ended up to prove otherwise. Privatizing health often worsened inequality. The wealthy people gained better access to health, better care, and the low to moderate income populations were forced to pay more and were reduced access and had poor health outcomes. And the system became fragmented, and public health infrastructure basically had weakened. And my opinion on if I think that the market should control them, like that, I don't think so. I think these are basic human rights, and I don't think the market should fully control this kind of stuff like education, health, and housing. And with this kind of system, a market system, it tends to prioritize profit over equity. And so I think with the whole name of market-driven system, I think you can see itself that it has no relation to equity and equality. It is focused on the money. And so I think a balance is needed, and public support ensures fairness, while private involvement can sometimes add innovation.